So hello, everybody. I am about to share about my current guardian, but first I wanted to just give a loving shout out to Lion and Eagle, two very, very powerful beings who have provided me with undescribable support and inspiration over the past 2 years. Okay, so now on to my relatively new but very potent guardian, Emu. The truth is that I'd actually been flirting with Emu for quite some time, but I felt intimidated because, this majestic bird comes into our life when it's time to prioritize a direct, practical, caring relationship with the physical body. She shows us that it doesn't matter how brilliant we are at philosophizing and contemplating, that in the end it's our body. That's the sacred vessel, the bedrock, as Richard says, of our soul. And there's really no way around that truth, even if we've become quite impressive physio-spiritual bypassers. So throughout my own life, consistently prioritizing and practicing physical self-care and feeling genuine love and appreciation for my body have been probably two of the most challenging and cyclically disappointing aspects of my life, my personal life. And also these past couple of years have been pretty rough with an unusual amount of travel and some major kind of earth-shaking losses, which have made keeping any kind of body care routine even more challenging than usual. And getting physically in shape, which my at times reductive mind could equate with harshness, pressure, and self-deprivation, has not felt very appealing. So a little less than 2 years ago, I was lying on a table at my spiritual coach and Reiki healer's office, and she was doing this body scan, and actually was pretty surprised at how open and relatively okay the majority of my chakras seemed to be, given all that was going on in my life. But my root chakra, oh my God, it was a total mess. She would never have said that, but that's what was happening. And that made sense because at that time in my life, my marriage of 30 years was coming to a very sudden end, and I felt completely uprooted, lacking in anchor. And so over the past couple of years, I've been steadily breathing safety back into my root chakra, learning to remember my body into the loving, safe, and trustworthy vessel that it was born to be, like a real home for my soul and its full expression. And even though it's taken time for me to really feel ready to call Emu in as my guardian, I realize now that I have kind of been humbly inching my way towards this giant, ancient, feathered vision of grounded majesty. I was ready. I was ready to receive Emu. And that, as often happens when I feel that DPS with working with an animal, something just shifts inside of me and it's usually from something very heady, with lots of concepts and ideas, to something more simple and playful. So in other words, whatever assumption I might have had that working with the Emu would entail getting on some strict, miserable diet and taking up running or something like that, that just disappeared. And instead, I felt this deep inner knowing that my journey would be nothing like that. And this childlike curiosity just kind of took center stage, as well as old memories. So one thing I started to remember was just how much I actually enjoyed my body when I was young. Even though I was always pretty shy, I loved singing and acting and dancing and just being ridiculously silly. My babysitter used to call me a comedian, which at the time I cried about because I really didn't know what the word meant. But I remember just how free and flexible and strong I felt in my body. I was always picking up and carrying big adults around, even when I was just a little kid. And I enjoyed stretching myself and my body past its limits until I didn't, right? It's kind of hard to pinpoint one exact moment when things started to change for me, when my body became this burdensome, demanding, and disappointing object, as opposed to this vital, sacred home. And I can remember lots of little things, though, over time, oppressive messages that I received early on, little and big traumas, debilitating allergies, a traumatizing rash on my legs at the age of 10, a steady build of self-consciousness and body shame, a slurping up of cultural conditioning about what it means to be a girl and a girl's body, an ever-increasing fear of being visible, of receiving unwanted positive or sexual attention, of being experienced as a threat, of being judged. right? So by the time I was a teenager, I really had developed a very strong habit of hiding, of suppressing my voice, of putting myself down, of emotional eating, of demoralizing yo-yo dieting, pushing myself to exercise as opposed to being just naturally and joyously moved to move. And I had completely forgotten the original joy, that innocence, that beauty of embodiment, and developed this increasingly ambivalent relationship to physical discomfort as well, even the good kind. So basically, my relationship to the body became like this big, obligatory, separate, shame and guilt-ridden, jumbled mess. Now, thankfully, I've come a long way since then, but the remnants are still very much there. And sometimes when I'm working with an animal in the dream arc, one simple phrase, right, from the codex is really all that I need to just get me started, to initiate this kind of transformative journey. And with the emu, it was the line, make your legs strong again, which might sound a little bit like a tagline in American politics right now. But what if that's all I needed to do to receive emu medicine, right? What if, instead of taking on some like all-encompassing and overwhelming, oppressive self-improvement regimen or shooting myself into sabotaging myself, I just focused on strengthening, or even just being more like lovingly aware of my legs and trusted that that would be enough. And I tell you that that simple phrase has brought about such a radical change in my everyday life so far. So at first I started just taking my legs for longer walks than usual. I spent more time barefoot on the earth in water. I even started taking better care of the plants and the ground outside of my house, like sweeping falling leaves and not getting so frustrated when the next day I had to sweep them up all over again, because the leaves in that sense were like my teachers, like helping me to make peace with an aspect of being in a body, that I've always tended to struggle with, which is the need for constant maintenance. So next thing I knew, I bought myself a rebounder, one of those little trampolines. And I am convinced that if the emu wasn't my guardian, that rebounder would still be living a very lonely life in my closet. But with the emu's support, and this is the magic of the dream arc, I actually started jumping on it. And after a bit of discomfort at the beginning, I really started to enjoy it. And over time, I found myself just naturally being inspired by and seeking out the support of people who have dedicated their lives to strengthening, nourishing, and loving their legs, their bodies, which includes freeing their voice. So, for example, I stumbled into several joyous rebounding yoga and Zumba instructors on YouTube who have really sweet senses of humor. They can't help but sing along to the music. And one thing I'm really loving to witness in these young women is just how committed they are to their practices. If they got a small space to work with, they just move the furniture out of the way. Half of the time while they're enthusiastically bouncing, dancing, and stretching, there are dogs, there are cats, there are kids just kind of sauntering in and out and across the room, sometimes tugging at their legs, taking over the yoga mat, or insisting on being carried. I've seen their partners sneaking out the back door in the middle of the session, and I just get such a kick out of that. And it feels like medicine for me, right? To witness people staying true to their practice, continuing to show up for their bodies no matter what's happening around them. And Momo Freehill, one of our beloved Dream Arc contributors who's been dancing people through the Dream Arc for years, is one of my emu heroes in this arena. So definitely check her out. And in addition to walking, sweeping, bouncing, and dancing more, I seem to be attracting and accepting more invitations to participate in ceremonies, and I'm bringing the emu with me. Lots has unfolded without any intentional planning, and the emu seems to be teaching me something about receiving, connected. So receiving an incredibly generous gift from the Gene Keys, for example, allowed me to receive support from Russell Feingold, one of our Dream Arc musicians, as well as a psychic shaman nutritionist whose practical and sacred wisdom has been extremely helpful. I recently received a wonderful invitation from two of my dear friends to create a collage. They came to my house with a bunch of magazines, and I got to explore what embodied majesty, grounded majesty, looks and feels like to me through imagery. And one of the magazines had the best images of ostriches and emus. So what are the chances? And this is one of my favorite emu pictures or ostrich picture. And I got some great ones of Bear too, the emu's life key partner. Check out the primal bear scream. I love this little part where baby panda is giving a gentle push to the woodpecker who's here to help me integrate self-care rhythm into my life. That's another way Eva was supporting me and learning to discern between judging pressure and a loving nudge in a healthy direction. In honor of my ancestral and celestial roots, I went to a magical place, totally magical, together with my dear friend, sound healer, and extremely inspiring dream art contributor, Starbird Miracle. This place was called the Dome of Light. We held a sacred sound ritual there, becoming hollow bones for spirit and releasing our wild voices. And it was just so perfect that we were surrounded by dragons. That's happening all the time these days. And then for my actual more formal ritual, I ended up bringing my emu prayer to a sweat lodge with one of the DreamArc's guest wisdom keepers, Wolf Martinez, returning to the cosmic womb, singing our prayers, transforming discomfort into surrender. It was just such a powerful, magical, and profoundly embodied experience. And guess what I just learned recently on a call with our wonderful DreamArc retreat hosts? These gorgeous feather earrings that were artfully created and gifted to me over a year ago by Carmen Perez Caballero are made of emu feathers. I just learned that. And sometimes we learn that our guardians have actually been with us way before we knew it. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I won't. I'll just leave you with one of the things that I love most about the DreamArc, and that's that when we surrender to our guardian with trust and patience, we end up receiving a completely unique experience that we could never, ever have planned with our minds. And very often our journeys start to touch on so many different aspects of our lives, and the relationship deepens over time, often supporting relationships with the other animals that we're meeting along the way, including human animals. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you so much.